When you're creating, there are definitely some stubborn crafty problems that pop up from time to time. And finding a solution is not always that easy. I'm gonna highlight 7 situations that I come up against with supplies that I love. That means it's time for some craft hacks. Best part about these hacks, we're gonna use some things that you have laying around the house. Hey chickies, welcome. I'm Ingrid Blackburn, and if you're new here, the goal is to get you inspired and get you creating. Today I thought it would be fun to share with you 7 crafty hacks that I personally use in situations that I've come up against over the last 20 years in painting and card making. So let's dive right in. This first hack is really about keeping your brushes where they should be. I'm famous for using lots of different brushes at once. I don't know, maybe you're the same. And at the end of the day, they're usually all sitting in water, and it's very easy for me to walk away and forget about them. And honestly, that ruins your brushes. So I wouldn't recommend that. This is a real easy hack. You can take any sort of binder clip, or any clip for that matter that has a round opening, and you can put it onto a glass jar or onto any sort of a container that has a flat edge. And there you have an instant little rack for a brush. It keeps it separate from every other brush, and so it can properly dry, or just keep it away from the mess that you're kind of creating around you. And you know what I'm talking about. I have that mess too. I'm sure at some point this has happened to you, whether you're watercoloring or maybe you're using some stencils and you're taping your paper to your stencil. Sometimes when you go to remove that tape, you end up tearing paper, especially when you're using watercolor paper. And that's beyond frustrating because there really isn't a fix for that other than trimming your project. So here's a quick little tip that helps to release that tape from your actual paper. You're gonna run any sort of a heat source. Now, I wouldn't recommend an embossing tool, but I do use the heated tool because it's not quite as hot, or you could use any sort of dual speed tool because they have a lower setting, and a hairdryer works great too. Basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna run it up against your tape that you have around your project right before you're looking to release it. Now, I still wouldn't just quickly rip that away because that's just asking for, a problem. What you can do is you can then just a little bit quicker than usual, you can easily peel that away, because what happens is the heat kind of releases that adhesive from the tape a little bit, and so it's definitely a nice hack. Basically, you're working smarter instead of harder. This hack I absolutely love to use. Sometimes you're working with lots of different mediums that have different colors, and you may not have enough palette knives, or maybe you can't find your palette knife. Don't worry, I have a DIY crafty solution for you, and it comes in the form of, that's right, trusty gift card. I keep those extra ones, those ones that you use up. Don't throw them away. Keep them and throw them into your craft stash, because you never know when you may need an extra palette knife. Now, one thing that I do love to use a gift card over something else is when I'm using gesso, because I don't necessarily always want to have brush strokes, and a gift card is a perfect way to use that medium on your project. You can also use it with paste. Works great through a stencil. You can use either side. You can also kind of flip it if you need to use 2 colors. There's a whole lot you can do with that handy little card. This craft hack, it's something that you wouldn't really necessarily think to do. But you're basically going to take an eraser. Now, any eraser will do here. It doesn't necessarily have to be a white eraser. I just happen to always have white erasers laying around. A lot of times when I use blending tools like blending stump or a tortillon, and I'm not really even sure if I'm saying that right. If I'm saying it wrong, somebody correct me in the comments section. What I love to do is clean those, because a lot of times when I use colored pencils, I'm using lots of different ones, and they tend to get really dirty really quick, especially if you're doing a lot of graphite work. Basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna rub your blending stump up against your eraser to basically erase the color. Now, sometimes they do get a little bit stained, and that's okay. As long as you rub it against your paper and that comes out clean, doesn't matter how it looks, it's good to go. So now you're ready to use a different color or just move on to another project. And that way you're not going through them left and right. It's a real quick and easy fix. Nail files are awesome to use because I don't necessarily always have sandpaper on hand, and I'm certainly not gonna buy a special tool that has little pieces of sandpaper. I mean, come on, seriously? And really the only other way to properly clear the end of that stump and get to some new material on it is pretty much trim it away with a craft knife, and let's be honest. Remember, I'm a little accident prone. That is not a good situation for me. So my solution? Let's use that nail file. You're basically just gonna scrape it up against the nail file. You can use the coarse side first and then go to the finer side. And then when you see that your nail file is kind of getting all clogged up with all those paper fibers, here's a bonus tip for you. Hey, just take some of that same tape that you used on your watercolor paper. You're gonna just kind of pick up some of those fibers out of your nail file. It's quick, it's easy, it's good to go for the next time. This next tip is probably my most used hack out of this group. What does this say that every time you come to my channel, I'm usually using an iron? I can't stand ironing, but yet I iron all the time in my crafter. Watercolor paper gets seriously wrinkled when you use it. And if you're working on a project over a long period of time, chances are you're getting it wet lots of different times, and every single time you do that, or if you use a heat source to go ahead and dry that, it's really gonna get warped. But there's a real easy fix, and I actually have two fixes for you. Now, the one that uses something that you already have in your house is gonna be an iron. You wanna protect your paper, so you can throw a paper towel over it, but I like to use parchment paper. But before you do that, first you're gonna want to actually spritz very lightly the back side of it. And when I say lightly, I really mean lightly. Don't saturate it. That's not the goal. You're just looking to add a little tiny mist to it. Once you have that, you're just gonna go ahead and put your parchment paper on top, because that's the paper that doesn't really burn. You're gonna use a very hot iron, and you're gonna go ahead and iron, and that's gonna help to flatten it out. It's really that simple. Now, if you're doing this for a card, you also have the option of running it through a die cutting machine. I would make sure that the top plate does not have too many cut grooves in it. And if it does, then I would probably definitely just go the iron route. You can run it through. Again, you're gonna wanna mist the back side, and that way it will do the same thing, because those two steel round rollers will press it a little bit more flat. Just go back and forth a few times and you'd be surprised at how flat those things come out. Now, once you've done that, whether it's your painting or your card, use some acrylic blocks or something really heavy, a couple phone books, if you still have those, dictionaries, whatever you have, and place them on top to just kind of weight that down. Now, this is really for those projects that get super warped, because as it's completely drying, that will also help to flatten it. And then when you're working on a card, let's say once you get that adhered to your project, throw some acrylic blocks on top again. And you really don't need to leave them on there very long, just 5-10 minutes or something like that. But you'd be surprised at how flat you can get something that was really warped. It's an awesome hack. I use it all the time. Want another one? Well, I kind of have a bonus one along with this one as well. A lot of times I use pastes and other things, and what happens is when they get on your stencils or other surfaces or other tools, a lot of times you really should clean those right away, because they have a tendency to harden, especially if you use things like whip spackle. When that stuff hardens, it's like cement on your tools. And forget about it, it'll wreck stencils. But I don't always have the freedom to just stop what I'm doing, run into the bathroom and wash off my stuff. Well, there's two things you can do. You can either have a tub of soapy water and you can just throw your stencils into there. But you know what? I have a tendency to forget about them and I have to put it on the floor. And remember, I'm a little accident prone. Guess what? I've stepped in one and gotten water all over the place. It's not really my favorite hack for that solution, but it is one that you can use. What I like to do is I like to just kind of put my stencil off to the side, and then I take a spray bottle and I just spritz it a couple times. And I only need to kind of keep it wet. This is not a long-term solution, but to just kind of keep it moist and keep those pastes from drying on my stencil. And that way I can go to the sink and I can properly clean it, or wipe it off if I can onto my glass surface, and then just finish the job over at the sink. It's a great hack, and one that I use all the time. And speaking of stencils, I've got some really cool tips and techniques that I can show you. I'll kick off the very next step in the video right here.